Hello and welcome to the Business of Story, the show dedicated to helping you excel through the stories you tell. I'm Park Howell and I consult, teach, coach, and speak on the power of story to leaders around the world. And I am here for you and your teams through virtual and in-person Business of Story masterclasses and mastery courses. Check them all out at businessofstory.com. And now, let's get on with the show. Hey, welcome to this final show of 2021. I can't believe I've got 6.5 years down now of doing the podcast, and I am so glad that you've come along for this journey. Today's a little bit of a different show because I learned about this independent podcasting platform called Goodpods when I was on a trip to Austin, Texas a couple weeks ago. And I was so excited to learn about it because of the hassles I've had with Apple Podcasts. SoundCloud showed up and wanted to start charging me more for hosting there. And just quite honestly, I'm getting fed up with the big platforms and the impact they can have on us independent podcasters. So when I found Goodpods, it came to me through a promotional email, which I don't typically open up unsolicited solicitations. But Goodpods caught my attention. Why? Well, because of the reasons that I mentioned, but it is created by this brother-sister team that have all kinds of experience in storytelling and national network communications. And they realized that while books have places to go where people can understand who's reading what books and share the books that they like on like Goodreads and whatever, there was nothing for podcasts. And that's what Goodpods is all about. So I'm actually absolutely pumped about it. And the thing here is, while this is going to sound like an endorsement, it is an endorsement. I just want to be super clear. They are not paying to be on this show. I'm making no money in this at all. I just want to share with you this new platform that I think is really great to help you not only find podcasts out there, but also to help you share podcasts that you listen to with the groups and other folks that follow you. And of course, for the Business of Story, if you follow me on Goodpods, every time you listen to one of these shows, someone else is going to learn about it. I love that. So while sitting in the Austin airport, I reached out to Goodpods co-founder J Ramberg and invited her on the show. You know what? To her credit, she got back to me immediately and said yes.
So with Goodpods for podcasters, the problem it solves is, how do I get the word out? Let's just say I start a podcast, JJ's podcast, and Jenny listens to it on any other podcast app. It goes into Never Never Land, and I have to depend upon Jenny actually sharing or telling her friends about it. If Jenny listens to JJ's podcast on Goodpods, well, suddenly it goes into her feed. So all her friends see it. And then there's an everyone feed. So the whole community sees it, assuming she doesn't make it private. So every listen then becomes a piece of marketing.
JJ and her brother Ken Ramberg created Goodpods so you can follow your friends and groups to see what they are listening to, and by the same token, share the shows that you love. The two also created a search engine called Dog that helps feed dogs in need with every search. To date, Dog has donated more than $7 million. That's pretty amazing, just through searching. JJ was named to Inc. magazine's Female Founders 100, and Goodpods was listed as one of Fast Company's most innovative companies in 2021. But before launching Goodpods, JJ was an anchor on MSNBC for 12 years. She also hosted the podcast Been There, Built That for 3 seasons, where she interviewed founders to tell the stories of how they built their organizations with the focus on understanding how they dealt with setbacks along the way. She interviewed such entrepreneurial notables as Neil Blumenthal of Warby Parker, Boston Beer Company's Jim Koch, John Foley of Peloton, Jamie Kern-Lima of IT Cosmetics, Zillow's Spencer Raskoff, and Bobby Brown. JJ was also a host and reporter for 4 years at CNN, covering stories ranging from Hurricane Katrina to the New York Stock Exchange. She was the co-host of The Flip Side, a talk show focused on the business news of the day. But today, You are going to be learning about the importance of shared experience to capture an audience's attention, and we'll explore the premise that the power of storytelling rests in the specifics. Plus, we're going to get specific on how Goodpods can help you find and share your favorite shows with your community. So all that and more right here on The Business of Story with J Ramberg. JJ, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to talk to you.
Well, I am really excited how quickly this all came together because I just learned about Goodpods literally 10 days ago when I was traveling to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, of all places. And I got pinged by you all and I thought, oh no, not another platform. And when I started looking into it, I was really fascinated by what you're doing for us independent voices and podcasters out there. So I reached out to you and you very kindly within 15 minutes said, yes, be happy to be here. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for reaching out. Yeah, we're doing a lot. We are very focused on raising the voices of independent podcasters, helping listeners discover great podcasts of all kinds. And that's what Goodpods is all about.
And you have a remarkable background in business storytelling, in network broadcast communication. Can you quickly tell us how those kind of all intersected to bring us Goodpods?
Yeah. So, well, for anyone who doesn't know, I'll just quickly say what Goodpods is. So, Goodpods is a podcast player, which you use like any other player. But the magic of it is that you can follow your friends and experts and groups to see what they're listening to. So from the listener side, the problem it solves is, which I used to have all the time, is I'm going out for a run. I'm like, what do I listen to? What's something that everyone loves who I trust? And so now I can just look on Goodpods and say, oh, cool, my sister loves this, or this interesting person I know loves this, and press play right there. For the indie podcaster we have every podcast on there, right? So it's not just indie, but for the podcaster, where it becomes interesting is that there are great voices out there who do not have industry connections or big marketing budgets, and so may not get noticed by a top 10 list somewhere. But on Goodpods, I will see, for instance, that you listen to some cool podcasts, and so I will listen to it as well. And so that's just a good marketing kind of word of mouth for all podcasts. Anyhow, that is a long way of getting around to how does this all get together?
That's okay.
It's important to know what it is to make it all make sense. The way it came together is I had a podcast. I was an anchor for MSNBC for over a decade. I had a podcast. It was a business show. It wasn't political whatsoever. And I had a podcast and I realized it did well. I'd like to say it's because my content was just so incredible, and maybe it was, but it's also because I was attached to this big company and had a national television show. And it got back to what I was saying before, that I thought, what about all these great voices that don't have these connections? How are they going to get heard? And so that was really, part of the impetus to create Goodpods.
And you hosted that podcast, Been There, Built That. Was it similar? I have not heard that particular show. Is it similar to How I Built This from NPR? Because you interviewed a lot of the same people.
My focus for my podcast and my show was really for the entrepreneur themselves. And so we went a little bit more into the nitty gritty of how things are done. So it was inspirational and sort of a great story, but also we would get down to the real dirt of how did you actually do this?
Now, you and your brother came together to co-found Goodpods. What is the overall origin story, or have you already touched on that a little bit when you were kind of explaining what it was? But I mean, you guys have done a lot, and you yourself have built a lot of cool companies in the past. Why this? Why now? And how did you two come together on it?
Yeah, so Ken and I have co-founded a couple companies together. There's Good Shop, a mission-driven coupon company. There's a new one called dogdog.org, which is a search engine. You use it like Google, but it raises money for dog shelters every time you use it. And then there's Goodpods. And so, I explained why we created Goodpods to help listeners find podcasts, to help podcasters find new listeners. But it's a very typical sort of entrepreneurial story in that we were experiencing a problem ourselves, right? As a listener, I could not figure out what podcast to listen to. And I always wanted to know what my friends were listening to, but they weren't always available to tell me at the moment I needed to listen. And so that's why we started Goodpods.
So, JJ, looking at your background and your storytelling chops, because you were a producer for a while and then you've been on these, national and international TV shows, you talk about in your storytelling shared experiences and the importance of that. Can we touch on that a little bit? Because, of course, Business' story is about helping people, whether they're telling their brand story better or their sales and marketing story better. And when you send in your background, your bio, that idea of shared experiences, I would like to just dive into a little bit deeper. What do you mean by that? And how do you actually find it so it resonates with an audience sitting across from you?
I try and think about, for the companies that we've created, what is the problem we are solving? And how do I communicate that to our audience in a way where we feel like we can empathize with each other, right? So, for instance, with Goodpods, I explain my exact story of getting into my car and thinking, what do I want to listen to? And having to text my brother and say, what are you listening to? But he's not there. So then I'm like spending a half an hour searching through my phone and saying, what are good podcasts to listen to? Right. And so I think when I tell that story, the audience feels right then, oh, I've had that experience too. And then I can explain how Goodpod solves that problem. And so it's really about, why did I start this? And does this resonate with you as well?
That, as you explained it, it seems so obvious to, I think, most listeners that that's what brands ought to do, is what is the business I'm in? What problem am I solving for? And yet so often it seems like so few companies know how to articulate that and tell that story. They often default to their features and functions and how their code is better than something else or their user experience. And they seem to overlook the problem they're actually solving for. They may know it intuitively, but they're not articulating it like you did here. Do you see that in your world, and how can people overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, I fall prey to it sometimes too, right? It just is, because when you're building something, you get excited about all the features, and you forget sometimes you have to, or you think it's the feature that's getting someone excited about your product. And maybe it is, by the way, but you gotta, first you have to connect with somebody. You have to connect on a big picture with somebody, and then you can get down to the details of how you're fixing the problem.
And from your background producing and hosting news shows and business shows, what did you learn in those roles that have really benefited you in the business role now you're in?
I think it's all about storytelling, right? I used to tell other people's stories, and now I'm telling my own. So it's all the same. It's, how do you talk about something in a compelling way that people are excited about it? And getting down to specifics too. So I mentioned DogDog. So dogdog.org, again, is a search engine. We donate profits to dog shelters, right? So that's like good, easy, great. Everyone loves that, right? Everyone who loves dogs, which most people loves that. But what I really have to do when talking about that a company is talk about individual dogs that we have helped. Because it's one thing to say, okay, we've donated 7 million dogs to dog shelters, and that's exciting to hear. But really, when you hear about the dog that was found in a dumpster and rescued by an organization filled with amazing people, but is run on a shoestring budget, depending on volunteers, and that you can, simply by switching from Google to DogDog, you get the same great search results, right? Simply by doing that, then suddenly Frenchie can get the medicine and the food and the help finding a forever home that dog needs, right? So I think you also have to get, when you talk about stories, get to the specifics.
Get to that singular narrative and really that singular character, in this case, Frenchie the dog, right? And is it this idea that our brain just has a hard time processing large numbers or groups of things, that we don't care so much about 2, 3, or 4 or a million dogs or people as much as we can really relate to that one?
Well, I think it's like, if you just look at the news, for example, right? When you hear about genocide or something awful, and you hear really big numbers that you just can't even imagine because it's so far from your life, right? It kind of, for many people, just like goes in one ear and out the other because you can't relate. And then you see one mother's story who is in the middle of this, and suddenly it changes everything. I mean, you think of that polar bear picture that sort of changed the way people thought about climate change, the starving polar bear, right? Climate change is really hard to understand. You see a starving polar bear, and it is suddenly not hard to understand anymore.
Is that something, again, going back to your producing chops, when you are producing these news stories and business stories, that they taught you or you learned from other producers out there? Because, again, I try to underscore this point to my clients and our listeners as well. And sometimes it's not that easy. They think they should be talking about departments and companies and large brands and whatever. And I say, no, boil it down to that one individual. And by proxy, they represent the larger problem that you're solving for. So going back to the beginning of that question, is this something that they teach you in the producing realm when you're out there trying to make a story hit the masses, but have to connect at many different levels?
What I learned early on in news, and I worked for Dateline NBC before, it wasn't a crime show back then, it was news, kind of like 60 Minutes. And what I learned when I was just learning to write stories, long form stories, is give details, right? So when I first started, would just kind of write the story. This person did this, blah, 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 blah. And I learned, no, say what they were wearing, say what they were eating, say how they walked. Were they lumbering? Were they light on their feet? All of these details bring something to life and allows the audience to connect much more than, John walked into a room, you know, John slowly walked into the room and looked around to see if anybody else was there. He had a stain on his shirt because he had just eaten lunch really quickly. And you know what, I'm making this up, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to say that it's kind of hard to pull off, though, if it's not ingrained in you. Can you give us an example of how you've used details like that in telling your stories around some of your different projects and jobs, your startups, even Goodpods, of how people can use it in the business world?
Well, again, when I talk about Goodpods and how it solves a problem for listeners, I always give the specific of, I'm going out for a run. I want to listen to a podcast while I'm running, and I have an hour to run, and I spend 30 minutes. This is in the past before Goodpods, but I spend 30 minutes of it scrolling through. And people can relate to that versus, hey, I have a really hard time finding good podcasts to listen to. Right? Because I think you can suddenly empathize with that moment of frustration as a listener where I want to go running and I am wasting my running time looking for a podcast to listen to. And isn't it cool that now I can go on Goodpods and see a feed where it says, oh, Mel listened to this, Joe listened to this, Ken listened to this, and I can just press play. I'm getting all these great recommendations from people who I trust.
The other thing that strikes me about Goodpods is my wife and I listen to shows. We're driving all the time. We live up here in northern Arizona, and so we're going down to Phoenix or seeing our kids over in, just got back from Austin and San Diego. So we're always trying to look for shows, and we go on the main podcast app that, you can library everything, but I find it is really cumbersome to use. You get in there, the user interface has not changed on that app. And I've always thought, is anyone going to come up with a better app to make these things easier to find and listen to? Do you guys feel like, because I'm so new to Goodpods, do you feel like you have accomplished that with yours?
I do. We spent a lot of time on the user interface and the user experience, and we're not done, right? It is a living, breathing thing. So Goodpods, we add new features all the time or organize them differently, what have you, based on user feedback. But yes, I think when you come onto Goodpods, it's such a fun and, to use a word of the time, a delightful experience. But the colors, the organization, just the idea that that I can see what friends are listening to makes it so much easier. So there's just the typical, how do I organize the stuff that I want to bookmark and save for later, which I think we've done a good job at. But then on top of that, how do I have this other really easy way to discover podcasts?
Yeah, and what is the kind of feedback that you guys are getting so far on it? Because it hasn't been out that long, right?
It hasn't. We've had some kind of amazing things happen to us, like Fast Company named us one of their top most innovative social networks. Kim Kardashian West and Alyssa Milano posted about it. And so we did not pay them. This just people love podcasts. So we've gotten a lot of kind of really fun things happen to us. The feedback has been great because the problem of discovery is such a big problem for users and for podcasters, and we are helping to solve that.
Why do you think it took so long for a company like you to come along and solve this problem? Because it seems, at least to me, to an avid listener, it's been a challenge for a while, and I never had that aha moment until you guys showed up saying, well, here's an easier way to go about this.
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me, right? We already know that it works in books with Goodreads, and it works with restaurants, and it works with style. And so I don't know why it took so long.
What do you think, or what, being a prognosticator for us in the podcast world, where do you think we're going to be in another 5 years with podcasts? Is it going to grow, or will it just kind of level out? What do you think is going to happen?
I don't think it'll level out. There's so much happening. We are just sort of in the baby phase of this industry right now. And still, though much more grown up than it was even 5 years ago, I think more of the interesting stuff is going to come around monetization for podcasts and discovery, because I think there's a lot of great stuff out there already and the barriers are so low for creating podcasts.
A lot of people tell me that too, that they're thinking about starting a podcast, but they're like, there's so many out there. How can I possibly be heard and found? And it gets them to shy away, or they get into it for a month or two and find it kind of exhausting and just kind of stop doing them. And I've learned in business of story after 6.5 years, and from some very smart people, that it takes you a solid 18 months to really build your audience, unless you are a significant influencer out there, which most people aren't. Do you find the same thing? And you, having been a podcast host with a large network behind you to promote it, what are some of the best ways people can go about launching their show and promoting it, so maybe they can up that listenership, make it a little bit faster instead of a year and a half into it to figure out if this experiment's going to work or not?
Well, of course, I'm going to say Goodpods, right? Because that's why we created it. So with Goodpods for podcasters, the problem it solves is, how do I get the word out? So if you listen to, let's just say I start a podcast, JJ's podcast, right? And Jenny listens to it on any other podcast app, it goes into Never Never Land. And I have to depend upon Jenny actually sharing or telling her friends about it. If Jenny listens to JJ's podcast on Goodpods, well, suddenly it goes into my feed, right? Or her feed. So all her friends see it. And then there's an everyone feed. So the whole community sees it, assuming she doesn't make it private. So every listen then becomes a piece of marketing and a piece of exposure. So we see podcasts go viral all the time on Goodpods. Under the radar podcasts go viral because someone's seen it on the feed and listens, and then their friend listens, and then their friend listens. And what I say to people is, you don't have to tell people, hey, here's JJ's podcast, go listen to it on Apple or Spotify. They'll listen to it on Apple or Spotify, and it doesn't really get you much, right? If you tell them to listen to it on Goodpods, well, then suddenly what you also get is this piece of marketing with every listen. And so you start to build community around this.
I say, JJ, at this point, I think I should probably point out to my listeners, Goodpods is not a sponsor of Business of Story, because this is sounding like a commercial coming from me. We'll be right back with J Ramberg. But since this show is all about sharing podcasts out around the world on their platform, there's also another platform called Audrey.com that enables show hosts like me to connect with other hosts and do a podcast promo swap. So this is the first one I'm doing, and it is for the good folks over at the Sips, Suds, and Smokes podcast. Check it out.
Hey, it's good old boy Mike.
This is good old boy Dave.
From Sips, Suds, and Smokes. Sips, Suds, and Smokes covers wine, tea, coffee, distilled spirits, whiskey, scotch, beer, cigars.
People whose first name starts with Q.
Bad fake British accents.
And we always take time to make fun of the people of Alabama.
Banned once again.
It's a 1-hour episode that's mildly entertaining for about 22 minutes.
I think mildly would be a vast improvement.
Well, we do have the only beer show with the Holy Man. We talk about these products and rate them with our unique rating system, like our Suds 5 rating. Do you really have something better to do with your life for an hour than actually listen to this show?
Well, don't make them think about it.
Well, join us on this radio station, podcast network, or via our Android app.
And now back to our show with J Ramberg. I'm just really excited about the platform, and that's why I wanted to bring it to our listeners. But now I want you to do some coaching for me as a newbie on there that everybody could benefit from, because I have shared Goodpods with other friends and other podcast hosts to try to build my community. It's kind of a chicken egg thing is my experience. So I've got Business Story on there, and I had no other listeners that I knew of, on Podcast or Friends. So I have invited others out. A couple of them have accepted. Most of them were leery. They were like, I don't know. I don't need another app tracking my, listening. And I go, I'm not really sure this is it. But what I'm finding, so we have number one, that reluctance. And I imagine you come into that out there. And given what Facebook is doing, it is hard on all platforms out there right now. But what, for me, as a newbie host who wants to really grow his listenership, what can I be doing on Goodpods, knowing now I have 3 friends maybe that have signed up?
So the easiest way to engage with Goodpods is to use it as your player. My pitch for switching it over to your player is, you get everything that you get from any other player, plus the added value of this social part of Goodpods. And I would say the added value of the user experience being really fun and fantastic. And I love the color yellow. It makes me happy every time I go look at it. So that is at the very basic, switch over to Goodpods simply as your player. It's easy. It's fun. You'll like it. You're not giving anything up. And so that's just basic. And then once you use it, now you have an engaged profile. Once you have that, invite your friends to come listen to it. If you are a podcaster, if you get people to start listening to the podcast on Goodpods, it is instant exposure to the community every single time someone listens. So it's instant marketing. If they listen somewhere else, there's no marketing happening. It's just listens. If they listen on Goodpods, it's a normal listen, tracked as it is everywhere else, plus it's this marketing. In addition, you can engage with people who are your listeners. So you can see that someone listens and say like, hey, thanks so much for listening. Who do you think we should have on next, or what have you? Anything you want to ask. You can like the fact that they listen. So you can create a community around that and just create some interaction. I want to make it very clear, you can make anything you want private. I also want to make it clear that we do not sell ads on Goodpods. So it's not like we're targeting you with ads or anything like that.
Now, if I am a listener and do not have my own show, the main benefit there is what? Just that sharing, that fact that I don't have to go out and look for a bunch of recommendations. I'm following my friends and listening to what they've got and what they're listening to.
Yeah, you're following your friends. You're following other people who like what you like. You're following experts. So we have some, really amazing people who I don't know personally, but I've seen them in the feed and I like what they listen to. And now I've started following them and I get great suggestions from them. But I always find things like the Forefront podcast. I've gone sort of down a Web3 rabbit hole recently, right? And I wasn't familiar with Forefront podcast before, but I saw it on someone's feed with a little review saying like, this is a really good primer for Web3. And then I listened to it.
Interesting. And you've got that user interface experience that is easier than some of the others out there. That, I think, is a big point that I'd like to make, because we're so, often I'm looking for them. I hate to say it, while I'm driving. I've listened to a show, now I want to go see, listen to something else, and that's kind of dangerous. But man, oh man, there's a tangled web to try to find them on my existing app.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to podcast players, a lot of people are using just what came at them first. It's not that they have actively chosen it as a podcast app. It's just what they started using. And I think that if you actively choose Goodpods, you will be thrilled with what it is, because it's fun. It's really fun. It's fun to see what other people are listening to. And again, as a podcaster, it's a really easy way to start to grow your audience.
And one of the other features you have on there is this tip jar concept. I mean, is that effective? Do people actually give hosts like me tips?
Oh, yeah. So there are a bunch of things that we've created that are incredibly useful for indie podcasters. Again, I told you one of the reasons we started this. Of course, you can get everything. You can get the daily and slow burn, et cetera, on Goodpods. But we really try and serve the indie podcaster. So one of the things is you could put a tip jar on the podcast on your page where you link up your either Patreon or Venmo or PayPal. And people, we are not a middleman there. All we do is or middle person there. All we do is just link over to your Venmo or PayPal or Patreon. So there's a tip jar. But also what we have, which I think is really cool, are these indie only top 100 lists. So, for example, if you are a news podcast, you are not going to beat out The Daily or Up First or CNN 5 Things, right? You're just not. But on every top 100 list that we have, overall or by category, there's a little toggle that says indie only. And when you toggle to that, well, suddenly you can make that top 100 chart because you're being judged against, different universe of podcasters. And that's been really fun to see. And we've seen some great podcasts surface to the top once you do indie only.
Yeah, I found that with Business of Story. I was on there for all of a week and then got a notification from you all that I showed up as, I think, number 38 in top business podcasts and maybe 44 or something like that for marketing. I have to go back and look again, but that must have been the indie button somebody hit, or you guys sent that and let me know about it.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah, it's fun. And again, you're just building community and excitement around small podcasts as well as larger ones, or indie ones as well as non-indie ones, which we're very excited about over here. There are lots of voices that don't make it to the top in other places.
And I guess that's self-serving too, is for all of you listeners out there, I want you to make Goodpods your player now. It's going to be easier to use. And you'll actually be doing me a favor because you'll be marketing my program to more folks out there of like-minded that don't even know I exist, because it is so hard to be found out there. Now, I'm happy to say I'm among the top 10% of downloaded podcasts in the world, but I think that's probably not only because of content and great guests like JJ here, but I mean, I've been doing this every week for 6.5 years, and, we can always grow our numbers. So, if you haven't made Goodpods your player yet, please do that now. And like JJ says, it's fun. And if you like the yellow color or the color yellow, it's even better.
I know. I'm a big fan. I love what we've built over. And by the way, I don't say that lightly, because I could say in the beginning when we launched, I did not love what we built. Now, I really, and another thing I put out there for podcasters, listeners alike, everything we do is based on feedback. So we are open to all feedback.
How long did it take you to build it, and when did you officially launch?
Oh, it took a while, but I can't even really say when we officially launched, because it was so kind of cockamamie with pandemic and quarantine. And so we were in beta, and then we sort of stayed in beta, and then we kind of launched. And so there wasn't an official, like, we're out here moment that there probably would have been in a less strange couple of years.
Yeah, because literally, I think it was 2 weeks ago was the first time I became aware of Goodpods, and I got something in my email, or I don't recall where I found it. And then the more I started looking, it felt like a big launch was underway, but maybe I just got into it at that point. I don't know.
Well, we're thrilled to have you on. That's so exciting.
Well, JJ, thank you so much for being here today and sharing with our listeners this great new platform you've got. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I was about to say, I appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much.
And where can they find more? Just at goodpods.com?
Yeah, goodpods.com, or you can download it on the Google Play Store or the App Store.
Awesome. And thank you all for listening to this edition of the Business of Story. If you know someone that can benefit from Goodpods as well, listeners out there that are looking for recommendations or just an easier listening experience, send them on over there or share this episode with them. And if I can be of service to you, come on over to businessofstory.com. If you have yet to do your ABTs and selling course, check it out over at businessofstory.thinkific.com. And come on back next Monday when we'll have another amazing story artist right here for you like JJ. And until then, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is a story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.